What's going on, guys? This is going to be your lore dump for Fenlock, and kind of Fenolor, which is one of the more prominent countries in my book, arguably the most prominent country within Imperaven, as it relates to my protagonist. It's where Fenolor is where pretty much the entirety of my first book takes place, save for a quick stint in the Northern Reach, which is not technically a part of Fenolor. But yeah, I just figured that I would give you guys a quick rundown about a little aspect of my world. Keep you guys a little interested if you're really into lore. So, Fenolor. Fenolor is a very new nation in the context of human history, and it used to be a part of Onith, the country to the south. So this all used to be Onith. And 296 years ago, after Ilivara, the oldest of the shepherds raised under Umnar's care, left the safety of Umnar's care in the peaks of Hemlas, which is right here, she kind of enters back into the world of humanity and doesn't really have a purpose. She sees the Fenish people, the way that they're being treated, and ultimately that leads to her leading a rebellion. So she is the instigator and the leader of the Fenish rebellion, the Lady Ilivara, the oldest of the known living shepherds. And 296 years ago, she leads the Fenish rebellion against the Ionian Empire. She wins it, and the birth of Fenolor is a thing. We have Fenolor as a nation is born after she wins the rebellion. Again, this was a long time ago, and you learn about the altered life stages of the shepherds within my literature. I'm not going to go too far into them now, but shepherds do live quite a bit longer than normal mortals do. They are not immortal themselves, but long enough to where at the beginning of our first book, at chapter 1, Ilivara is still ruling Fenolor, and she is not quite a monarch as you would find like the king of Onith. She's trying to set up a somewhat more parliamentary system, but she has the respect and is basically treated as their queen, though she does not hold the title. So Fenolor is this very new country, and it's one that is kind of defined, at least in the age that we find ourselves at the beginning of my first book, by its innovation. So their economic growth, their just overall innovation and growth that they've seen under Ilivara has sparked global interest. And it's something that our protagonist, Thenrik, the primary protagonist of my book series, really does have a hard time with. It's not that he's a Luddite or anything, it's just, we have to endeavor to understand like beings that live a very long life and the specific ones that they have lived. Again, that's a whole new video. But kind of being left behind by the innovations of man. Again, that's not necessarily Fenish lore, so we're going to not get too off topic. If you want to learn more about that, read my book. It comes out this summer. But at the end of my day, my book is prescribed as being a flintlock fantasy. So that's the general genre that I put these books in, just because of the age, and obviously, we're running around with flintlock rifles. But that's for like books 2, 3, 4, 5. Like that's not for book 1, which ultimately like makes me feel a little bit manipulative as an author, because I do call this series a flintlock fantasy series because it is. But in my first book, my protagonist Thenrik, he's kind of come out of this self-inflicted solitude. He's been hanging out up in the Northern Reach. We explore that a lot more in the book. And when he kind of rejoins the kind of established society, a lot of things have happened, not the least of which is the invention of the firearm, and that they're at least the flintlock. And that's not even by anyone within Imperaven, or at least known Imperaven. Like the invention of the flintlock rifle is something that the musket is something that was discovered overseas and brought back to this country. And the dwarven smiths of Osventir, that's over there, are now replicating these weapons. And it's like something that's happening, and it's something that's known to both my characters and our readers, but it's not something that really affects the novel a crazy amount, at least the first one. It becomes pivotal and very, very necessary to understand in books 2, 3 to the end of the series. But in this first book, we acknowledge their presence and how cumbersome they are for an inexperienced hand to use. And because of that, we don't really spend a whole lot of time actually making practical use of the weapons, because our characters are kind of caught up doing other things. They don't have the time to really establish and learn the proficiency with these weapons. They just kind of do what they know. And that brings up another point about Fenelor and just my world as a whole. So this is Thenric's sword. I'm almost done with this render of it. I really like the way that it came out. But anyway, one of the focal points of this book is of the shepherds, the race of people born of the Eotomni, which are cosmic beings that settled on this earth millennia ago. You can think of them. Some people worship the Eotomni as gods. They are not gods within my lore. There's a cosmic hierarchy that I'm not going to get into in this video. But you can think of their children something akin to demigods. That is what the shepherds are. And they don't bear any sense of unnatural strength or speed. That's all the same as a normal person would have. But what you do see is kind of the schism of magic within my world, and it revolves around the 5 senses. I'm not going to go over all of the 5 senses now, but one of the senses is the touch, the art of weaving. So the shepherds uniquely are able to enchant objects in this world with magic. That's something that is exclusive to the shepherds. So wizards cannot do that. They can't enchant objects. They can't make anything hold magic. That is something that only the shepherds can do, and that is the only thing that they can do with magic. It's very limiting, but it's also very liberating when you start to dissect magic into different factions like that, because while they can't just conjure a flame at any given present need, while they can't bring lightning forth from the sky, it's not hard magic in the sense that you would find a normal wizard or sorcerer. What it does allow them to do is they can just store magic in just about anything. We see our protagonist has very trivial spells, he's woven into his duster so that he can stay warm when it's cold. He's woven into his boots so that, his socks stay dry. Just very practical uses. And he is woven into, his weapons to give him an edge in battle. Olemni, his sword, it has all sorts of incantations in it, and I'm not going to go over all of them now, but because they are able to enchant their weapons, what that kind of means is they're very skeptical over these cumbersome and clunky firearms that don't offer them a whole lot because of their unique gifts. It might be a leap forward for the rest of men, but it doesn't offer at least exclusively the shepherds that much of an edge. Why would you take the time to learn, a black powder rifle when you can just enchant an arrow not to be affected by gravity? However complex of a spell that may be, if you could theoretically do it, then it gains the same level of efficiency, if not more so. And I think that competing, I just did this with my hands. That competing insight into altered physics and how it might stall innovation is something that really does define the way that specifically the shepherds interact with the world and the way that they interact with each other. Because, as I stated earlier, Ilivara is the ruler of Fenelor. And there are not that many shepherds left since the fall of Tumari. Again, lore that you guys can learn later. But Ilivara is the Lady Fen. Everyone she's in charge of, more or less, are Aethling and human. Aethling, another magic set, we'll get to that. But the humans and just normal, ordinary folk, that is who she is in charge of, and therefore she's typically acting within their best interest. It's the mark of a good ruler, and it's something that it's why her character is so selfless and kind of bears the semblance of being an authority figure even to my protagonist, she is a good bit older than Fenric. She's been around for a lot longer, and there's some familial ties that go way back between her and Fenric, but again, that becomes very apparent immediately in my first book. But yeah, so it's just something that really defines the relationship between shepherds and the world at large. And with Fenlock, we kind of got away from the lore of Fenlock, but whatever. That's what's going on here. This is Fenlock, the capital city of Fenolor, and I guess I'll just go over like a really quick, author perspective on why I chose to do this art style versus something like more practical. Like a more practical implementation of like drawing out a city would be a top-down view of the city, and you're just kind of doing icons on a map to display the reader where you are at all times. And I think that's, obviously probably a little bit more effective in the sense of like a directional aspect. But what I don't think that carries is the aesthetic that I'm really trying to beat into my reader with this book. And I think one of the good things that I have the technical skill to draw these is because I can help with a little bit of the identity crisis that I ran into with my first book, of showing you the vibe that I'm trying to commit, because it wouldn't be to the fault of my reader for mistaking my first book, at least the first couple chapters of it, to be a more traditional fantasy novel. My protagonist doesn't get to Fenlock for several chapters, and we're kind of over in the wilderness, so we don't see a whole lot of people, and he's just got his big old sword. So that's something that putting this artwork into the novel is something that I'm trying to help my reader kind of latch on to where we are as it correlates to familiar human history. So we have the ancient Grey Spire, which was built by the great King Esvotath just over 5 millennia ago, and that's a deep piece of lore. The Finnish Plateau, which is what it sits on, used to house the city of King Esvotath and his legions of Halborn, and it wasn't until Ilivara, the Lady Fen, established Fenolor as a country and made Fenlock its capital that she expanded the city below the plateau. So all of these buildings, they exist only because of Ilivara, and thus they were built in the same kind of generation. So the architecture on these buildings are going to look significantly different than the architecture you would find on the upper plateau, which is going to be much more ancient. I'm pointing at the map. What I'm trying to do is point off the page. That's not something that I chose to include into this drawing, because again, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to display to my reader kind of generally the optics that I want this story to be viewed on. It's not this setting, it is this setting, the innovation behind where we are and humankind, and the challenges that it'll bring to our protagonists. So in this city, it's kind of marked by the 7 walls of Fulten. This is the 7th, 6th, and 5th walls of Fulten, and you can kind of see them. This is also the 7th. It cuts out art, and they're kind of separating the city into different districts, and they're not really financial districts. They're more districts wrought of utility. So we have the traders district right here inside the 4th wall of Fulten. This is where the traders union headquarters is, and I need to look at the camera to make sure that you guys can kind of see all of this, but this here is the traders union headquarters, and this is where all of the trade shows are, as well as the Great Dwarven Highway of Osvintim, and this is a giant highway that was cut into the plateau that was requested by Ilivara so that they could link the upper plateau and the lower plateau so that the city was one big cohesive city. And this is kind of the main highway, really the only practical highway that you can get from one half of the city to the other. And because of that, all of our traders kind of sell their wares within this cut and along this road. You'll see a lot of think of like a traditional farmer's market, and you know, even shops with like established housings like smithing shops and stuff like that within the city will have stands here just because it's more common to a seller's or to a buyer's eye. So this is kind of the trading district, and then this is what I would call the academic district of Fenlock. So we have, you know, I'm not going to go super in depth into like how like religion and academia were tethered together within like the, you know, the familiar context of our human history, but it's pretty similar within my book just because of, you know, it makes sense. So we have, you know, different cathedrals and churches placed within this district, and then we also have our universities dedicated to arts and science, and our observatory would be over here. I've thought about including it. We have our secondary observatory over here that you can see like kind of deeper in the city, but that's not part of the, this is part of the new academic district over here. That's something, again, that you'll read about in my books. But yeah, so that's going to be just inside the 6th wall of Fall 10. And then the 7th wall of Fall 10 is the most recent construction, and it was built several hundred meters away from the 6th wall of Fall 10. And it was basically to facilitate as much growth as they can. And even as our protagonist Thenric comes up upon the 7th wall of Fall 10, it's gotten to the point where all of the structures have met the wall. If they wanted to expand any more, they would need to build another wall, which is a conversation that gets had later in the series, but it's not super relevant to the story because an endeavor like that would span significantly longer than, you know, what my story, the amount of time that my story covers. But again, that's part of building a more grounded world. It's like these are conversations that need to be had amongst our characters, and it's not going to ever really be the focal point of our story. You know, I don't want to bore my reader to death, but it's absolutely happening in my mind as the author when I'm developing these characters, whether I want to include it into the narrative or not. And the way that really helps me is maybe I don't want to include it into the narrative, but it can make its way into these pictures. So I can have some level of intentionality that I don't even need to share with my reader. But if someone were to ask it about it, like I have an intention behind the things that I'm doing, behind the second observatory, behind the Ethiopian arch, you know, over here, and why the buildings around the arch are a lot more haphazardly kind of strewn about versus the rest of the city, which is actually laid out pretty well. A mistake that they've learned from building the other, you know, structures earlier on in Fenlock's history. It's, you know, it shows innovation, it shows progression within the minds of our architects as the city kind of carries outward. And it's fun that I get to display that to my reader within this medium. So that's just a little bit about Fenlock, and I guess you know, we talked about the shepherds and stuff like that. If I'm curious, like if there's certain things that I said in this video that I didn't expand upon, please let me know if you want me to expand upon them. It's hard for me to tell you guys so much about my world because, like, for the books that I have written about this world, I have so many more, like, I guess, quote, canon documents that I have saved on my laptop explaining all of this to just like organize my thoughts. It's what my drawings are meant for. I have drawings that aren't going to make it into my book, but they help to organize my thoughts as I'm working on these pieces. And if there's something that I didn't expand on that you want me to hear, or that you want me to, like, please let me know, and I absolutely will make a video expanding on it. You know, like I said, I'm a great artist, and hopefully I'm a half decent writer. I'm not all that good at talking. That's why I write books, and I made this YouTube channel out of necessity. But you know, that's Fenlock, and this is my map. This is Fenloor, Onith, Rockham. I didn't even talk about the dwarves in this video. I am going to talk to you guys about the dwarven race of my world. It's so much fun because, like, you're playing at, you know what, I'm gonna cut, I don't even know how long this video is, it's probably like 20 minutes, so if I want to make a video about like the dwarves or the Earthling or the other races in my world, I'll make a separate video about that, just because, again, like that could be dedicated to this. This didn't even stay to relegated to Fenlock, but I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you so much. Y'all have an excellent day.